There is a kind of pain that doesn't announce itself, that it doesn't arrive with sirens or shattering glass. It doesn't come dressed in drama or loud enough for anyone nearby to notice. Comes quietly, the way dusk comes, slowly replacing the light until you look up one day and realize the room has gone completely dark around you, and you can't even remember exactly when it happened. That is the pain I am talking about. The kind that builds over years. The kind that wears the face of love and duty and family loyalty. The kind that you convince yourself is normal, even noble, because the people causing it are the same people who kissed your forehead when you were small and told you that you were their greatest gift. I believe that. For 34 years I believed it completely. My name is Sarah. I am the eldest daughter of a family that, from the outside, looked like a perfectly ordinary, perfectly loving household. And in many ways it was. There were Sunday dinners that smelled like rosemary and warmth. There were holidays where my father laughed so hard he cried. There were evenings on the back porch where my mother would braid my hair and hum old songs, and everything felt safe and permanent, like it could never change. But things change. They always do. And sometimes the change comes not from strangers or enemies or the cruelties of the outside world, but from the very people who were supposed to be your safe place. This is the story of how I gave 8 years of my life, 8 years of my savings, my dreams, my energy, my silent tears at 2 a.m., to keep my family's home from being taken away. How I restructured my entire existence around one monthly payment because I loved my parents and I believed, with everything in me, that love like that doesn't go unnoticed. How I watched my younger brother do nothing, absolutely nothing, while I carried the full weight of our family's financial survival on my shoulders, quietly, without complaint, without recognition. And this is the story of the afternoon I sat in a lawyer's office and heard a will read aloud, and discovered that 8 years of sacrifice had earned me exactly one line. A line that simply confirmed I existed. Everything else, the house, the savings, the investments, every single thing my parents had ever built, went to Daniel. My brother. The one who had never paid a single bill. I want you to stay with me through this story. Not because I need your anger on my behalf, though I understand if you feel it, but because I think there are women listening to this right now who know exactly what I am talking about. Women who have been so busy being strong, so committed to holding everyone else together, that they forgot to ask whether anyone was holding them. This story is for you. Let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a mid-sized town in a house that my parents had bought young and proud. A 3-bedroom with a garden out back and a driveway that cracked a little every winter and got patched every spring. It wasn't a grand house, but it was ours. It held every birthday cake, every argument, every reconciliation, every late-night conversation that mattered. It was the address of my entire childhood. And I loved it the way you love something that is threaded through your earliest memories. My father was a good man. A quiet, steady man who worked in logistics for 20 years and came home every evening at the same time and sat in the same chair and watched the evening news with a cup of tea. He wasn't expressive in the way some fathers are. He didn't say "I love you" easily, but he showed up. Always. And in my world, showing up meant everything. My mother was warmth itself. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's favorite meal and made it without being asked. She was the peacemaker, the glue. The one who smoothed over every tension before it became a fracture. People adored her. I adored her. And then there was Daniel, 3 years younger than me. Bright, charismatic, the kind of person who could walk into a room and within 10 minutes have everyone laughing. My parents loved him fiercely, we all did. He was magnetic in that effortless way some people are. The kind that makes you smile even when part of you recognizes that behind the charm, there isn't always substance. But I didn't think about that then. He was my little brother. I protected him. I covered for him when he came home past curfew. I helped him with his homework. When he got into trouble, which happened more than my parents ever fully knew, I was the one who quietly fixed it. That was who I was in this family. The fixer. The responsible one. The one you could always count on. I carried that identity like a badge of honor. I should have recognized it for what it was, a role that was quietly consuming me. When I was 22, I left for the city. Got a degree in accounting, landed a steady job at a mid-sized firm, built a small but stable life for myself. I had an apartment with plants on the windowsill and a savings account I was slowly, carefully growing. I had plans, nothing extravagant, just the quiet, ordinary dreams that feel enormous when they are yours. A home of my own someday. Travel. Stability. Peace. I called my parents every Sunday without fail. I visited every few months. I sent money at Christmas and birthdays, and sometimes just because I was, by every definition, a devoted daughter. And I was happy, or close enough to it that the difference didn't yet matter. Then, when I was 26, my father had a stroke. It happened on a Tuesday evening in February. He was at the dinner table, reaching for the salt, and suddenly he was on the floor and my mother was screaming, and everything changed in the space of a single breath. He survived. He recovered slowly, partially, with lasting effects to his left side and his speech. He was never quite the same man after that. But he was alive and we were grateful, and we gathered around him and told ourselves that was enough. What we didn't gather around, what no one wanted to look at directly, was the money. The hospital bills were catastrophic. My father's insurance had gaps nobody had noticed until those gaps became craters. And the mortgage, which had always been quietly managed, always just barely handled, was suddenly not being handled at all. 3 months behind. Then 4. Letters from the bank began arriving. White envelopes with official fonts that my mother hid in the kitchen drawer and pretended weren't there. I found them on a Sunday visit. I remember pulling them out one by one and reading them at the kitchen table while my mother stood at the sink with her back to me, washing dishes that were already clean. The silence between us said everything. I looked around that kitchen, at the family photos on the wall, at the little ceramic rooster my father had bought at a market 20 years ago, at the dent in the doorframe from the time Daniel rode his bicycle indoors at age 7, and I made a decision. I would pay the mortgage. It seemed in that moment like the only decision a person who loved her family could make. It didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like love expressed in the only language the situation offered. I sat down with my mother and told her. She cried. She held my face in both hands and told me I was her greatest blessing. My father, from his chair in the living room, called out my name in that slow, careful way he spoke after the stroke, and there was so much feeling in just those 2 syllables that I nearly broke down completely. I drove home that evening with a lighter heart than I'd had in months. I had no idea what I had just signed up for. The first payment went out on the 1st of March. $1,140. I remember the exact number because I watched it leave my account like watching a small part of a future I had imagined for myself quietly disappear. I told myself it was temporary, a bridge, just something to get the family through the hard season until things stabilized. Months passed. Things did not stabilize. My father's recovery was longer and more expensive than anyone anticipated. There were physiotherapy appointments, medication costs, a home adaptation to make the bathroom safer. My mother, who had worked part-time at a florist for years, couldn't manage more hours while also caring for him. Daniel, who had been drifting through a series of vague entrepreneurial projects since finishing a business degree he barely completed, was in no position to contribute financially. He was, as my mother always gently explained, going through a difficult time finding his footing. So I paid, month after month, first of every month without exception. My savings plan quietly dissolved. The deposit I had been building toward my own home shrank, then disappeared entirely. I stopped thinking about travel. I stopped thinking about the future in the expansive, open-ended way young women are supposed to be able to think about it, all possibility and horizon. My future shrank to fit inside a single monthly obligation. And I told myself that was fine, that this was what family meant. That someday, when things were better, when my parents were stable, when Daniel found his footing, the breathing room would return. Year 2. Year 3. I got a small promotion at work. For about 3 weeks, I let myself imagine redirecting some of that extra income toward my own life. Then my mother called to mention that the boiler needed replacing and she wasn't sure how to manage it, and her voice had that particular quality, not quite asking, but arranged in a way that made not helping feel impossible. I paid for the boiler. Year 4. Daniel launched a new business. A cafe, he said, full of enthusiasm and energy and absolutely no business plan. My parents were electric with excitement about it. I heard about it every Sunday call, every visit. My father's eyes, which had grown a little dim in the years since his stroke, genuinely lit up when Daniel's name came up in the context of this new venture. The cafe lasted 7 months. Then it was quietly never mentioned again. I kept paying the mortgage. There were nights, and I need to be honest here because this story is only worth telling if I tell it honestly, There were nights when something that felt uncomfortably close to resentment would rise up in me, and I would have to sit with it in the dark of my apartment and talk myself back from it. I didn't want to be resentful. Resentment felt like a betrayal of the love that had motivated all of it in the first place. So I pressed it down. I rationalized it away. I told myself I was tired, that tiredness makes everything feel heavier than it is. I became very good at managing my own feelings so that no one else ever had to. Looking back now, I see that for what it was, a habit I had learned so young and so thoroughly that I didn't even recognize it as a habit. I had been managing my feelings to protect everyone else's comfort since childhood. The mortgage was just the most expensive version of something I had always done for free. Year 5. Year 6. My friends were buying homes, getting married, having children, building lives with visible, tangible architecture. I attended their housewarming parties and toasted their futures and smiled genuinely, because I was happy for them. But I drove home alone afterward and sat in my car sometimes before going inside. Just sitting, trying to locate inside myself the version of my future that had not yet been built. It was getting harder to find. Year 7, my father's health declined again. A secondary complication, his heart this time. More hospital time. More costs. More quiet rearranging of my finances to cover gaps and soften landings. I was 32 years old and I was tired in a way that sleep did not fix. But I kept going. Because that is what you do when you love people. You keep going. Daniel, by year 7, had cycled through 3 more ventures, 2 significant relationship breakups that my mother relayed to me in distressed detail every Sunday, and at least 1 loan from a friend that I only heard about secondhand. He was living between my parents' house and various temporary arrangements. He was charming and chaotic and somehow always forgiven before the consequences fully arrived. My mother would sometimes say to me, in the gentle, careful voice she used for difficult things, "He's sensitive, Sarah. He feels things very deeply. He needs more support than you do." I always nodded. I always said I understood. What I understand now that I did not understand then is that I had been so consistently capable and self-sufficient that my family had quietly stopped considering that I might also need support. My reliability had accidentally communicated that I didn't require care, that I was simply a different category of person. One who provided, one who managed, one who was fine. I was not fine, but I had told that story of being fine so many times and so convincingly that even I had almost come to believe it. Year 8 began with a quiet dread I couldn't fully explain. My father was weaker. I could hear it in his voice on Sundays, the pauses longer, the words more carefully chosen, the tiredness beneath even the good days. He was 71 and the years had taken their toll, and I think somewhere in me I knew, without allowing myself to fully know it, that we were moving toward an ending. I visited more frequently that year. I sat with him in the living room and we watched old films, and he held my hand sometimes without saying anything, and those are among the most precious memories I have. Whatever came after, whatever I discovered, whatever broke, I keep those moments separate and protected. They belong only to love. He passed away on a Thursday morning in October, peacefully in his own bed in the house that I had spent 8 years keeping his. We buried him on a gray Saturday. The whole family gathered. Relatives I hadn't seen in years, neighbors, old friends. The house was full of food and flowers and quiet conversation, and the strange suspended reality feeling of grief, where everything looks slightly unreal and ordinary sounds seem to come from far away. I held my mother. I organized things. I was, as I had always been, the one who kept everything moving when everyone else was too broken to function. Daniel cried openly and was comforted by everyone around him. I noticed this without bitterness, truly. He had loved our father. The grief was real. But I also noticed, the way you notice things when you have been quietly observant your entire life, that no one came to check on me. 1 week after the funeral, we sat in the office of my father's solicitor. The office was small and neutral, the kind of room designed to have no personality so that the business conducted inside it has nowhere to hide. There was a wooden desk and 3 chairs and a window that looked out onto a gray car park and a clock on the wall that was slightly too loud. My mother sat to my left. Daniel sat to my right. The solicitor, a careful, precise man named Mr. Harding who spoke in the measured tones of someone long accustomed to delivering information that detonated quietly in other people's lives, opened a folder and began to read. I will not recreate the legal language. What it amounted to was this. The family home, The house I had paid the mortgage on for 8 consecutive years, totaling somewhere in the region of $109,000, was left entirely to Daniel. The savings account, modest but present, went to Daniel. My father's small investment portfolio, accumulated over 30 years of careful, patient deposits, went to Daniel. I was mentioned once, by name, as a surviving dependent. No inheritance, no acknowledgement, no financial recognition of any kind. Mr. Harding finished reading and looked up, and the clock on the wall was still too loud, and I became, in that moment, extremely aware of my own breathing. I did not cry. I did not speak. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, and I looked at the middle distance, and I processed, very slowly and very privately, the full meaning of what I had just heard. On the way out, I touched my mother's arm gently and asked if we could speak. She agreed, but her eyes were moving sideways, the particular eye movement of someone preparing to be defended against. We stood in the car park in the gray October air, and I said very calmly, "Mom, I have paid the mortgage on that house for 8 years. I need you to help me understand what happened." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Daniel needed more help, sweetheart. You've always been so capable. You've always managed so well." There it was. The logic that had governed 8 years without my knowledge or consent. I was penalized for my own reliability. My competence had been read as not needing, and my not needing had been used to justify excluding me from everything my father had ever built. I drove home in total silence. I didn't eat that evening. I lay in my bed and looked at the ceiling and went through every memory of the past 8 years with this new information overlaid on top of it, like a transparency placed over an image, revealing what was always there but never visible. I did not sleep, but somewhere around 4 in the morning something shifted. It was not an angry shift. It was something quieter and more durable than anger. It was a decision, the kind that comes not from heat but from clarity, from the cold, clean recognition that this was not acceptable, that love did not require me to absorb this without response, that my father, whatever his final wishes, had benefited for 8 years from my financial commitment to his home, and that fact did not simply dissolve because it was inconvenient. I called a solicitor at 9 the following morning. What I learned in that first consultation was that in many jurisdictions, a legal principle called unjust enrichment can apply in exactly these circumstances, where one party has financially contributed to another's asset over a sustained period, with a reasonable expectation of acknowledgement or return, and been denied any recognition. I had 8 years of bank records, every transfer, dated and documented. The total sum was precise and provable and significant. My solicitor drafted a formal letter. It was calm, legal, and completely unemotional. It stated the facts. It presented the figures. It made a clear and reasonable request for financial settlement from the estate, proportionate to my contribution. Daniel called me within 48 hours. I will not repeat everything he said, but the core of it was that I was being selfish, that I was dishonoring our father, that family didn't do this to each other, that he had his own struggles I didn't understand, that I was making everything worse. I let him finish. And then I said very quietly, very clearly, "Daniel, I paid for that house for 8 years. I did it without complaint, without recognition, and without any promise of return, because I loved our parents and I believed that love was seen. I'm not doing this out of greed. I'm doing this because what happened was not right. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you already know that." He hung up. For months later, after legal letters and difficult conversations and one mediation session I almost didn't attend, an agreement was reached. A formal settlement, a meaningful, fair proportion of the estate, reflecting my 8-year contribution, was transferred to me. I signed the papers at a different solicitor's office on a Tuesday morning in February. Outside the window it was raining lightly, the kind of rain that isn't dramatic, just steady and cleansing. I signed my name, shook hands, walked to my car. And I sat there for a while. Not triumphant. Not angry. Not even particularly sad. Just quiet. Breathing. For the first time in 8 years, I was breathing without a weight on my chest that I had learned to call normal. My relationship with my mother is not what it was. She is older now and I visit still and we are kind to each other. But there is a glass wall between us that we both see and neither of us knows how to move. She lives with what she permitted. I live with having loved her enough to keep showing up anyway. Daniel and I do not speak. Perhaps one day. Perhaps not. Here is what I know now, that I would tell my 26-year-old self if I could find her in that kitchen, reading those bank letters at the table while her mother washed already clean dishes. You can love people fully and still protect yourself. Those two things are not opposites. Sacrifice freely given is beautiful. But sacrifice that is taken for granted, that is factored into decisions without your knowledge, that is used as a reason to give you less, that is not love received. That is love exploited. Being strong is not the same as being someone who doesn't need anything. And perhaps most importantly, the people who truly love you will never use your strength as an excuse to overlook you. I spent 8 years being the rock. I am learning slowly to also be the water. My name is Sarah. I paid for a home I never lived in, and in losing it I finally found my own. To everyone carrying something heavy in silence tonight, please hear me. You are allowed to put it down. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to matter in the same rooms where you have spent years making sure everyone else did. Know your worth before someone else decides it for you.